Far, far below the deepest delvings of the Dwarves, the world is gnawed by nameless things. Even Sauron knows them not. They are older than he. Now I have walked there, but I will bring no report to darken the light of day. In that despair, my enemy was my only hope. This is all that Gandalf will tell of the horrors he encountered after falling with the Balrog into the deepest depths beneath Moria. With this mysterious statement, Gandalf manages to spark in us our curiosity and the first embers of a great fascination with the most mysterious beings in all of Arda. But what were these monstrosities? Where did they come from, and how powerful are they? Welcome, Eldonyar. I'm happy to see so many new faces here, and I hope to see even more of you next time, when we will look at the secret histories of Aragorn and what happened in his past that he so desperately wants to be forgotten. So be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be reminded when the next chapter starts. But this week we ask ourselves, who and what are the Nameless Ones? Unfortunately, throughout his life, Tolkien wrote hardly anything in his texts and stories about the nameless beings under the earth. So in order for us to decipher more about the creatures Gandalf was so hesitant to describe, we will have to dig deep into the lore and into the deeper workings of Ea, the whole of creation, as it came into being through the will of Ilúvatar. The first hint that we receive from Gandalf's word is their age. They are older than Sauron. Though this might sound like an easy first point to start with, it also offers us our first difficulty. Because how can they be older? Sauron is a Maya, a divine, angelic spirit who existed before the creation of space and time and the physical universe of Ea. So in that sense, nothing can really predate Sauron, barring of course Ilúvatar. Unless, of course, we interpret that phrase slightly differently. It could also be interpreted as meaning not older than the being of Sauron, but the name of Sauron. For we must remember that Sauron was not the original name of the Maya that was to swear fealty to Melkor Morgoth, and eventually became the second Dark Lord. Before then, he was known as Mairon, the Admirable, and as such, the nameless horrors beneath the roots of the world could, in this interpretation, have been in service of Melkor long before him, and thus might have been older than Sauron in the ranks of evil. Tolkien himself seems to have believed this latter interpretation for a while, because in an older version of The Lord of the Rings, he writes, "Of the dark things unguessed that gnaw the world below the deepest delvings of the Dwarves," he says, "Sauron alone may know of them, or one older than he. I will bring no report to stain the light of day." In this version, the Nameless Ones were not older than Sauron, but were already in the service of the Dark Lord Melkor Morgoth at this time. And even more than that, they were known to Sauron. To Tolkien, at this time, they seem to have been a kind of being similar to Sauron, corrupted Maiar, who had been lured by Melkor into joining him and who served him thereafter. In ancient battles in the elder days, such as the War of the Powers, in which the Valar, the divine angelic spirits of vastly greater power than the mere Maiar, and who functioned as the supreme guardians of Arda, first defeated and captured Melkor, though the Nameless Ones, as Melkor's servants, might have escaped. They would have hid in the misty mountains or in the ruins of the dread fortress of Utumno, and for centuries would have hid deeper and deeper, making their way down to the very roots of the world itself. In tunnels they had gnawed themselves into the bedrock of the world. They would thus have turned their backs on their old master Morgoth, in order to become masters of their own corrupted minds. However, as we all know, Tolkien later came to disregard this version, and wrote down in later lore Gandalf's words as we heard them at the start of this chapter, alluding to the Nameless Ones as truly older than Sauron, and being hidden and nameless even to him. But how is that possible? Well, as I told you earlier, before Arda, before the whole of creation itself, there existed Eru Ilúvatar, the All-Father and Creator, who, before anything else, created many disembodied spirits that existed with him in a spaceless, timeless void. And these spirits, who were then called the Ainur, but of which some would later descend into Ea and become the Valar and the Maiar, created Ea through a song sang to please the one above all, Eru Ilúvatar. However, whilst the greater group of Ainur sang following the melody set forth by Ilúvatar, some of them followed a variation that Melkor had devised, and which clashed with the melody of Ilúvatar. And it was exactly in the clashes between the theme of Ilúvatar and the discord of Melkor, Tolkien later postulated, that evil beings arose, neither planned nor directly created by Melkor, but which afterwards afflicted the world and hated both the designs of Ilúvatar as well as Melkor himself. Now, Tolkien never specified in any of his manuscripts what these evil things were that arose out of the discord between the two melodies, although he implies that Melkor was ignorant of the existences of these beings, and would only have learned of their existence and nature as the ages within Ea passed. In that sense, it would form a very possible origin for the Nameless Ones, for they would have thus existed from the very point when Ilúvatar made the vision of the song reality and created Ea. And thus they would have been the oldest of all the species and peoples that were to live therein. They would have been there even before the Valar and Maiar, since they only descended into the universe a short time later. The Nameless Ones had been up to the evils of their own devices in the interior of the world since the beginning, digging passages through the bedrock that none in Middle-earth even suspected. In absolute terms, the Nameless Ones would not be older than Sauron, but they would have been the very first creatures of the physical universe. How powerful the Nameless Ones are can now only be guessed at. However, of his journey through the tunnels of these creatures, Gandalf speaks only what we have already heard.
Now I have walked there, but I will bring no report to darken the light of day. In that despair, my enemy was my only hope.
While this statement may seem relatively bland at first, it does suggest that the Nameless Ones must be extremely terrible and powerful. For earlier in the saga, Gandalf was nearly contemptuous in regards to Sauron and the power of Mordor, when he recited the inscription on the One Ring in the Black Speech at the Council of Rivendell. The change in the wizard's voice was astounding. Suddenly it became menacing, powerful, harsh as stone. A shadow seemed to pass over the high sun, and the porch for a moment grew dark. All trembled, and the elves stopped their ears. Here too the world was darkened, though only a little, and only for a moment. But it was darkened. It was the ring verse in its original black speech, one of the most powerful incantations in Arda, and the doom of the entire second and third age of the sun. If tapping into magic this powerful only casts a momentary shadow across the sun, then how monstrously terrible must be the Nameless ones, if the spoken knowledge of their existence would eclipse the light of day and bring the Maya that Gandalf is to despair. Their power could be far greater than Sauron's. They could be more devastating than even the winged fire dragons of Morgoth that drove back the host of the Valar in the War of Wrath. Unfortunately, it is impossible to speak with any specificity of the might of the Nameless ones, except for naming the scale on which their might could be found, nigh unchallenged, as Gandalf did not even dare speak of them, while he did so without hesitation of other monsters like the Balrog or Ancalagon the Black. Thus we can come to understand why these beings were so feared. If Tolkien's earlier assumptions were correct, then they are corrupted Maiar who entered the service of Melkor Morgoth before Sauron, which put them on a level of power far beyond what any mortal of our time could face. Or they are the result of the clashes of the divine music that brought creation itself into being, and as such would be on a level of power far beyond what even the immortal and divine Maiar could face, and bring them to utter despair by even the faintest hint of their presence, the presence of those beings who, by evil tribes of ghostly renegade men, were worshipped in secret as the Nameless Gods. Thus we conclude this theory and this video. Did the knowledge surprise you? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed it and would like to learn more of the inner workings of Arda, be sure to subscribe and click the bell icon to be notified of the next chapter in the mysteries of Westerness, and learn of the secret histories of Aragorn and what happened in his past that the beloved High King of Gondor and Arnor so desperately wants to be forgotten. Now, I have been Irjikor Kuruvane, and I wish you all Namarie Meldonyar.